Hey there. You're listening to True Story No Cap. Real stories, no exaggeration, no lies. Just the raw, unfiltered moments life throws our way. Relax, lean back, and let's get started. The park hummed with voices, a kaleidoscope of colors. On a bench, lost in the lively flow of people, sat little Timmy and watched. Passers-by streamed past. Some walked unhurriedly, enjoying the greenery, others rushed about their business. The crowd was like a patchwork quilt, bright, diverse. Among the adults, children darted about, tiny tots, older kids, and some the same age as Timmy. Their parents, grandmothers, and grandfathers held their hands tightly. Timmy hadn't come here alone, but with his mom. Before this, they had traveled a long way by train. This trip was the first real adventure in his life. Never before had he seen such giant, hot steel monsters, emitting an unusual, yet somehow alluring smell. At the station, encountering this for the first time, he even felt a slight fear. Uncle Gary's rough voice cut in sharply. "What, scared like a girl?" he sneered, noticing his reaction. "And your mother was bragging that she was raising a boy?" Timmy couldn't stand Uncle Gary. This man was always loud, messy, with perpetual stubble and some kind of inner nastiness. His mom, on the other hand, seemed to have tender feelings for him. She hugged him, kissed him, stroked his hair, tried to please him in everything. Timmy just couldn't understand what she found attractive in this man. When Uncle Gary first crossed the threshold of their apartment, he even seemed pleasant to Timmy. He brought a whole pile of goodies with him: cake, sweets, juice, and for his mom, flowers. The house filled with a festive atmosphere, and Timmy loved holidays. But this visit didn't end. The man stayed. He settled in their small, cozy apartment with its old, creaky floors and wide windowsills. Timmy sincerely loved his home, an old, painfully familiar, wooden two-story house where every corner was dear to him. The neighbors here were always welcoming and kind to the boy. He just couldn't understand why adults contemptuously called it a dilapidated shack and complained that it should have been torn down long ago. "Why? It's so great here," he blurted out one day to Granny Carol, an elderly neighbor who often chatted with the curious boy and treated him to something tasty. Granny Carol laughed loudly to tears and then suddenly grew somber and hugged Timmy tightly. Granny Carol was wonderful, very kind. On this trip, Timmy missed her, although he enjoyed the adventure itself. Uncle Gary didn't evoke sympathy in Granny Carol either. She spoke sharply about him, calling him a tyrant, a drunkard, and a nobody. Timmy didn't understand the exact meaning of these words, but from the neighbor's tone he felt it was about something very bad, and the boy fully agreed with her. With the appearance of Uncle Gary, his mom's old friends stopped coming to the house, and that was even for the best, because their late-night gatherings in the kitchen often ended in loud laughter, noise, and sometimes quarrels that turned into fights. At such moments, Timmy would hide under the bed, trembling with fear, just to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. It was terrible and unpleasant. Uncle Gary rid them of these visits, and silence fell over the house, but the peace was short-lived. The new tenant turned out to be much worse than the previous guests. He yelled at his mom and Timmy, was perpetually dissatisfied, demanding unquestioning obedience. And soon, people reappeared in the apartment. This time, Uncle Gary's friends. Just as gloomy and mean as he was, Timmy was terrified of them. He imagined that these people were capable of harming both him and his mom. Sometimes Uncle Gary would just kick Timmy out of the house, saying, "Go get some air, you're annoying me," and lock the door from the inside. In vain, the boy tried to explain that it was cold or raining outside, that he would sit quietly like a mouse and wouldn't bother anyone. Uncle Gary was relentless, and his mom just silently agreed with him, so the boy would wander for hours around the deserted yard. It was a salvation if Granny Carol noticed him and took him in. The old woman's house was surprisingly clean and always smelled of something delicious. And although Timmy loved his home, looking at Granny Carol's bright, tidy rooms, he understood. Their house was always a mess. The neighbor didn't have empty bottles in the corners or dust and rubbish on the floor. Along the walls stood cabinets full of books. Timmy could spend hours looking at the pictures in them. Granny Carol even started teaching him to read. He learned quickly, letters formed words, and it seemed like real magic. Incomprehensible symbols gained meaning. But the lessons had to be interrupted. "We're leaving tomorrow," his mom announced one evening. "I've already packed." "There's nothing much to pack there anyway." Uncle Gary's hoarse voice came from the next room. "Where are we going?" Timmy asked. "To a better life," his mom answered evasively. "Everything will be different there." That night, Timmy couldn't fall asleep for a long time. His heart pounded with excitement, thoughts swirled in his little head, his soul anticipated a miracle. Something extraordinary, completely new, was about to happen. The unknown was a little frightening, but the joy of the upcoming changes outweighed the fear. In the morning, they had trouble waking Timmy up. "Get up quickly or we'll leave without you," Uncle Gary roared, seeing his mom trying unsuccessfully to lift her sleepy son from the sofa. Timmy instantly jumped up. He knew Uncle Gary wasn't joking. This man was capable of anything, and the threat of leaving him here sounded quite real. The station greeted the boy with a hum of voices and a colorful, attractive crowd. Timmy clung to his mom's hand, which was busy with heavy bags. He was afraid of getting lost in this boundless sea of people. And then they went out onto the platform, and before his stunned eyes appeared a miracle, the train. Giant, breathing heat, sparkling with colors and puffing like a colossal red-hot iron. For the first time in his life, Timmy saw a real locomotive. Of course, there were pictures of trains in Granny Carol's books, but a drawing was one thing. A living behemoth was another. The train simultaneously frightened and captivated him. "Well, why are you frozen, you gawker?" Uncle Gary roughly shoved the frozen Timmy. "Let's go," his mom agreed and headed towards the carriage. Inside, it was even cozier than he had imagined. Uncle Gary and his mom took the lower bunks, and Timmy was seated on the upper one. From there, he had a wonderful view of life in the carriage. And what landscapes flashed past the window. Timmy fell silent for several hours, which happened very rarely with him. Forests, endless fields, small villages flashed by. It turned out the world was incredibly big and beautiful. How he wished he could run out and wander through these groves, throw pebbles into the rivers glistening outside the window. Sometimes oncoming trains sped by on neighboring tracks. Passenger trains, freight trains. The most interesting ones were those carrying cars and other equipment. The clickety-clack of the wheels mesmerized Timmy. This rhythmic beat calmed him, promised adventures and new encounters. When dusk gathered outside the window and his mom told him to lie down, Timmy lay on the bunk and listened to this sound. It lulled the boy, tired from impressions, to sleep. In the morning, Timmy was awakened by a long whistle. At first, he didn't understand where he was and was scared. But then he remembered, smiled, and pressed himself against the window again. The train was speeding through amazingly beautiful hills. The landscapes were breathtaking, making his little heart flutter with delight. Timmy suddenly wanted to take out his album and pencils to capture this beauty. But he had neither an album nor pencils. All of that was left at home, at Granny Carol's. It was she who gave him such things, while his mom and Uncle Gary thought the children shouldn't be spoiled, and at 4 years old, it was still too early to draw. Soon the adults woke up. They slowly had breakfast of bread with sausage and drank tea from glasses in shiny holders. It was very tasty. After eating, Timmy was told to climb back onto the upper bunk. "Sit there quietly," Uncle Gary ordered. "Otherwise, they'll see you don't have a ticket and kick you off." The words, "riding without a ticket," frightened Timmy. He obediently climbed into his spot. He liked being up high, but his legs were already numb. He so wanted to walk through the carriage, look at the other passengers, maybe even run down the narrow aisle. But Uncle Gary made it clear he couldn't, and Timmy didn't even want to think about what would happen if he disobeyed. After some time, the train stopped. Timmy looked out the window. They were standing at a large, noisy station. "Let's get out and stretch our legs," his mom unexpectedly suggested. "It's a long stop. We'll have time to get some air." "Excellent idea," Uncle Gary agreed. Timmy was overjoyed. Finally, he could go outside. What city was this? What were the people and streets like here? He would find out soon. And how good it was that Uncle Gary wasn't going with them. Timmy only liked walking with his mom, just the two of them, but lately, it happened rarely. And now, such unexpected luck. At the station, his mom bought him a delicious jam pastry. He walked, tightly holding her hand, and looked around with curiosity. What a wonderful place. People smiled at him, the boy with big eyes. The sun was shining, sparrows were chirping. "It would be great to stay here forever," Timmy said dreamily. His mom smiled strangely, then they found themselves in a park. And there, so many swings, so many slides. "Can I?" he asked, looking at the bright playground. "Of course," his mom nodded. She sat down on a bench nearby and gestured, "Go, play, I'll wait." Timmy rushed headlong to the swings and slides. He rode everything, crawled through rope mazes, jumped on the trampoline. His delight knew no bounds. How wonderful that they came out for a walk in this particular city. There were many other children around. They laughed loudly, ran, chased each other. Timmy joined one group, then another. No one pushed him away. On the contrary, they were happy to have a new friend. After all, it's always more fun together. Finally, Timmy felt tired and missed his mom. Besides, he was very hungry. Why hadn't they called him yet? It was time to go back. The boy ran to the bench where his mom had been sitting, but the bench was empty. On the next one sat two old women looking after their grandchildren. On the next, a man with a stroller. There were no other benches nearby, and his mom wasn't there either. How? Where had she gone? What had happened? Maybe she just went to get water or a pastry? She'd be back soon. She'd laugh at his fear, just as long as she didn't tell Uncle Gary, or he'd tease him about being a girl again. The boy sat down on the empty bench next to the old women, who, absorbed in conversation, didn't pay attention to him. His mom had been sitting right here on the next one. That meant she would come back here. Of course she would come back. Where else? Time dragged on. The old women left, taking their grandchildren. The other benches also emptied. There were almost no children left on the playground. Dusk was falling, but Timmy still sat there as if rooted, waiting for his mom. He was cold, hungry, and unbearably scared. Adults hurried past, engrossed in their affairs. Timmy peered into the crowd, trying to find a familiar face. But deep down, a terrible understanding was dawning. His mom wouldn't come. Something awful, unthinkable, had happened. Maybe she was lost? Or that mean Uncle Gary had come, taken her, and told Timmy to stay. His mom always listened to him after all. What should he do? It was so scary, so cold, so lonely. And people no longer seemed as kind as they did in the morning. And the sun didn't shine so welcomingly. Even the playground didn't bring joy anymore. The swings were empty, the merry-go-rounds deserted, but he didn't want to sit on them at all. And suddenly something familiar flashed in the crowd. No, it wasn't his mom. An elderly woman was walking slowly down the alley, surprisingly similar to Granny Carol. Not so much in facial features, but in the expression of her eyes, her gait, her manners. Tears suddenly welled up in Timmy's eyes. This woman couldn't be mean. She, like Granny Carol, would definitely help in trouble, tell him what to do, comfort him. The boy jumped off the bench and rushed toward the stranger with the kind face. There was no time to lose. What if she walked past and disappeared into the crowd? "Hello, Auntie," Timmy said first. Granny Carol had always taught him that politeness was the key to everything. "Hello, little one." The woman looked at him with surprise, but very kindly. Her eyes were as blue and bright as Granny Carol's. This gave Timmy courage. "Do you know where my mom is?" he asked. "I'm very cold and I want to eat, and she's still not here." A flicker of anxiety crossed the woman's face. She knelt down to be at his level. "Little one, are you lost?" "I don't know," Timmy answered honestly. "I think my mom is lost. I stayed where she left me, but she's nowhere to be found." Part 2, through Eleanor Vance's eyes. The woman Timmy addressed turned out to be Eleanor Vance. She had lingered at the clinic where she went because of her fluctuating blood pressure. Age. The local doctor shrugged, writing out prescriptions. Yes, age was taking its toll. It had been a year since she retired, and she still couldn't believe it. Eleanor Vance had worked as a seamstress all her life. Behind her were incredibly difficult times when sometimes there wasn't even enough for the essentials. She still remembered that despair. It was then that something happened for which she had blamed herself all these years. Sometimes it seemed that her soul had found peace, that she had managed to convince herself of the correctness of her action. But then the feeling of guilt would surge with renewed force. Outwardly, she appeared calm and even cheerful, and no one suspected the heavy thoughts that tormented her. She and her husband hardly spoke about what had happened, but Eleanor Vance felt that he too suffered. A hidden sadness often flickered in his eyes. Such a thing was impossible to forget. Those were the turbulent 90s. Eleanor Vance was constantly at the factory, working double shifts. She returned home late, exhausted, depleted. Her legs ached, her back was sore, her eyes were tearing up. For this grueling labor, they paid pennies, and even those were constantly delayed. The director answered the dissatisfied, "If you don't like it, leave. There's a queue for your spot." This was true. Factories were closing, people were losing their jobs. Eleanor Vance held on, understanding that she wouldn't find other work. She took overtime, worked weekends, crawled home like a squeezed lemon. In their tiny rental apartment, their 2-year-old daughter Sarah was waiting. Her husband usually managed to pick her up from kindergarten. He had recently lost his job. A promising engineer was now forced to scrape by with odd jobs. He drove a taxi, unloaded wagons, helped on construction sites. He wasn't fired, but finding a new job in his specialty was impossible. He looked for any work, even as an electrician, although he had a higher education. But those were the times. There was no work. Parents on both sides couldn't help. They themselves were barely making ends meet and were already elderly. Both Eleanor Vance and her husband were late children in their families. The situation was desperate. But, strangely enough, Eleanor Vance remembered those times even with some warmth. They were young, madly in love with each other. It seemed all the difficulties were temporary, things would get better soon. Their beloved Sarah was by their side, bringing joy every day. And the main thing, they hadn't yet committed the act for which they now suffered. Their conscience was clear, and therefore, despite the lack of money, life was easier and calmer back then. Eleanor Vance clearly remembered the day she found out about her new pregnancy. Lately, she hadn't been feeling well, attributing everything to fatigue, nerves, poor nutrition, but then she finally went to the doctor. "You're pregnant," the doctor stated briefly after the examination. "It's already a long way along, 12, 13 weeks. It's surprising you didn't notice sooner." Eleanor Vance sat there, stunned. She had waited for her first daughter with such joy. Now, only horror. Their family was barely making ends meet. How could they feed another child? Deep down, of course, she wanted to experience the happiness of motherhood again, but she understood. Now it was an unaffordable luxury. "What termination?" the doctor asked tiredly, irritation on his face. "You see the term? It's too late. You'll have to give birth." Eleanor Vance barely made it home. Her temples pounded, tears burned her eyes. Conflicting feelings mixed in her soul, from sudden joy to complete despair. Thoughts raced in a frantic whirlwind. What to do? Look for a folk healer? Too scary? Try to work at home? Unrealistic with a growing belly and then with 2 children. Absorbed in her thoughts, she almost got hit by a car, crossing the road on a red light. A sharp honk brought her to her senses. She needed to pull herself together and tell her husband. He was the head of the family. It was his decision. She would never forget the expression of horror and hopelessness on her husband's face when he heard the news. "Well," he said distractedly, "since it happened, we'll have the baby. I think I found some odd jobs at a workshop. We'll manage somehow." He hugged her, trying to comfort her, and then he quickly got ready and left. A freight train had arrived at the station. They needed loaders. Her heart ached with pity for her husband. A wonderful engineer, a talented scientist who was valued at his research institute, was now forced to carry heavy loads and work as an apprentice. It was so unfair. And this child, because of him, their life would become even harder. But then Sarah, who was sitting on the floor, started crying. Usually she could play alone for a long time, but now there were tears. Eleanor Vance touched her forehead. It was burning. All thoughts about the future, about problems, receded. She had to take care of her daughter. The second pregnancy, so unwanted, was agonizing. Eleanor Vance constantly felt unwell, nauseous, dizzy, seeing spots before her eyes. This, of course, affected her work. It was difficult to fire a pregnant woman, but the director found a way. He forced her to write a resignation by her own will, threatening dismissal under the article for professional incompetence, which would close doors for her everywhere. Money became very scarce. Her husband tried his best, took any job, but there was a catastrophic lack of money for living, and soon another mouth was to appear. Eleanor Vance felt nothing towards the future child but irritation. She considered him a burden that would finally ruin their lives. She blamed herself for these thoughts, but she couldn't help it. Only just before giving birth, when it was time to prepare things for the baby, did Eleanor Vance soften a little. She was sure she was expecting a son and sewed several lovely blue little suits, diapers with airplanes. Looking at these tiny things, she felt tenderness for the belly dweller, as her husband jokingly called the baby for the first time. He, unlike her, awaited him with joy, made plans, despite the fatigue and difficulties. The baby was born on a damp November night. Between contractions, Eleanor Vance heard the wind hitting the windows and the rain drumming. Finally, a wrinkled, screaming red creature was placed on her chest. "A boy," the midwife said indifferently. Eleanor Vance looked at her son, trying to understand her feelings. She expected a surge of tenderness, like the first time, but now she only thought about how to feed this extra mouth. The baby was taken away, she was moved to a ward, and she fell into sleep with relief. In the morning, terrible news awaited her. After feeding, the doctor came into the ward and asked Eleanor Vance to come to her office. The woman's blood ran cold. Something was wrong with the baby. At the appointed time, she entered the chief doctor's office on shaky legs. "Have a seat," the doctor offered tiredly. "Your boy has serious heart and kidney defects. He will require lifelong treatment, and the medications are very expensive." "We have no money at all," Eleanor Vance whispered, feeling her blood turn to ice. Yes, she hadn't loved him immediately, but he was her son, and the news of his illnesses was a blow. Where would they get money for expensive medications when they were barely making ends meet? The doctor spoke of charitable foundations, sponsors, of the need to collect documents, to ask for help. "There's always a way out if there's a will," she insisted. It was easy for her to say. She wasn't the one raising a sick child. After being discharged, an exhausting life began with a sick infant and a capricious 3-year-old, in conditions of complete poverty. The son was named Miles, after her husband's great-grandfather, a long liver. Her husband believed the name would bring him health. Eleanor Vance didn't object, she didn't care. Miles turned out to be very restless. He constantly cried, ate poorly, slept little. Sarah, jealous of her brother, became uncontrollable, demanding attention, being capricious. Eleanor Vance felt like she was losing her mind. But the most terrible thing was Miles's confirmed diagnoses. At the clinic, it turned out that everything was even more serious than it seemed. He required lifelong treatment with very expensive drugs. Part was paid for by foundations, but the lion's share of the family budget went to medications. Eleanor Vance understood that the baby wasn't to blame, but she almost hated this tiny sufferer for all the troubles he brought. She didn't recognize herself. Where was her former kindness, compassion? How could she, who felt sorry for every homeless kitten, feel this way about her own sick son? But she couldn't control her feelings. Only much later was Eleanor Vance able to understand her state at that time. A difficult pregnancy, exhausting work, poverty, terrible diagnoses for her son, lack of support and hope. All this led to deep depression. It required the help of a specialist, but who thought about psychologists then? The main thing was to survive. Anyway, after a year, it became clear the family couldn't cope, neither morally, physically, nor financially. Eleanor Vance was the first to voice the terrible decision. "We can't manage," she said to her husband one evening, looking him directly in the eyes. "Miles is getting worse. We can't buy him all the medications. We're living in semi-starvation, denying ourselves and Sarah everything, and it's still not enough." "I'm trying," her husband replied quietly, lowering his gaze. He didn't argue, he understood she was right. "You're trying, I see. But you're not made of iron, you'll break soon, and then we'll lose everything. We can't live like this. We need to do something. I think we should put him in a special institution. They will provide him with treatment there. Orphan children are entitled to free medication." "To an orphanage? Give up our son?" Her husband looked at her with eyes full of horror. Unlike Eleanor Vance, he loved Miles. He talked to him, played with him, smiled at him, carried him on his back when he had a rare free moment. "What choice do we have?" Eleanor Vance burst out. "Watch him fade away? Spend the last pennies on his treatment, depriving Sarah of everything? Starve for his sake?" Her husband didn't answer, but she saw that he was thinking. Intellectually, he understood that a sick child was completely beyond their means, but making this step was agonizingly difficult. She understood him. Miles turned 1 year old. He was amazingly like his mother, big blue eyes, light curly hair, a button nose. A wonderful baby, as if from a postcard, only very thin. Perhaps his sweet appearance would help him. Rich people would be found for whom his treatment was a trifle, and he would have a happy, long life. But they couldn't manage. A rented apartment, odd jobs, Miles wasn't the child you could put in kindergarten at 2 and go back to work. He required constant care and expensive medications. No employer would tolerate endless sick leaves. And without treatment, it was scary to think what would become of him. They couldn't give him what he needed. There was only one way out. Her husband initially tried to save the situation, took any odd job, disappeared for days, trying to earn money, but in the end, he too realized it was time to act. Eleanor Vance would never forget that morning when they arrived at the orphanage. The special institution was in a neighboring region. They had arranged a meeting with the director. A middle-aged woman with tired, anxious eyes was waiting for them. Seeing her husband, who was tenderly holding Miles close, she asked, "Are you sure about your decision? Won't you regret it later?" "Yes, we have decided everything. We have no other choice," Eleanor Vance answered firmly, wanting to get it over with quickly. The baby smiled, clinging to his father, looking at his mother with trust. It was unbearable. "All right," the director sighed. "The documents are ready. Sign them. The child will be taken now." At these words, her husband instinctively held Miles tighter. Eleanor Vance also reached for her son, but stopped. Everything was decided. It would be better this way. Only the adults remained in the office. A nanny took Miles, casting a look full of condemnation at Eleanor Vance. She endured it. No one who hasn't gone through something similar has the right to judge. Life went on as usual. To avoid questions from neighbors, they rented an apartment in another district. Eleanor Vance returned to work. Things became easier, but the thought of her son left in the orphanage gave her no peace. They tried not to talk about it, each suffering in their own way. Eleanor Vance convinced herself, Miles is receiving treatment, Sarah is growing up in comfort, her husband isn't breaking his back at 3 jobs, he looks like a person. This is better for everyone. And yet at night she couldn't sleep, imagining how he was there. Were they feeding him? Were they hurting him? Maybe he had already been adopted? Her husband also suffered, tossing and turning beside her, but remained silent. He threw himself into work. His small workshop turned into a successful firm. There was enough money. Eleanor Vance also succeeded. The country changed. They became prosperous. They bought their own apartment, a car, started going to the sea. Sometimes Eleanor Vance thought, if Miles had been born now, they wouldn't have even thought of giving him up. Now they could afford any treatment, even surgery. Apparently, her husband thought the same. One day, when Sarah was asleep, he decided to talk. "How old is our son now?" he asked. 10, almost 11, she replied quietly. They rarely spoke about him. Sarah didn't remember her brother. "I'm thinking maybe we could take him back." "I think about it constantly, too. But will he forgive us? Will he understand? And probably he's already been adopted." "You're not against it?" Relief appeared on her husband's face. "I've been thinking about it for a long time. I just didn't dare to speak. Of course I'm not against it. I've been tormented by guilt all these years," she confessed, and it felt easier, as if a weight had been lifted from her soul. "What about Sarah? How do we tell her? Maybe tomorrow? But how to find the words? She's already a teenager who knows how she'll react." Eleanor Vance thought. Sarah often asked for a brother or sister, but after everything they had been through, they were afraid to have more children. And now their daughter would learn about her parents' terrible act. How would she perceive it? It was scary even to think about. "Let's not tell her yet," Eleanor Vance decided. "First we'll go there, find out how things are, meet Miles, and then we'll decide." Without delay, the following weekend they went to the orphanage, by the same road as 10 years ago. They told Sarah they were going to visit her father's friend. The orphanage had hardly changed, only there were more swings on the playground. The director was the same. She recognized them immediately. "I remember you," she said, looking at them. "You're the ones who left the boy. Your story is rare, usually. We have children from troubled families." "We want to take our son back," Eleanor Vance said directly. "Oh, really?" Surprise appeared on the director's face. "We were very poor then. We couldn't provide for his treatment." Her husband began to explain. "And now everything has improved and—" "And you decided this was temporary foster care?" the director interrupted, not hiding her irritation. "You gave him up when times were tough, and now that things are good, you've come to take him back?" "Don't judge if you haven't been in our shoes," Eleanor Vance replied calmly, although she was boiling inside. They were too dependent on this woman to quarrel. You won't be able to take your son. He's not here." "Where is he?" Eleanor Vance flinched. "Where is Miles?" "That I won't tell you," the director snapped. "Is it an adoption secret?" her husband insisted. "At least give us a hint." "Leave the premises," she repeated in an icy voice. "Otherwise, I'll call security. First they abandon, then they demand back." They left, crushed. On the porch, an elderly nanny with kind, sad eyes approached them. "Are you Miles's parents?" she asked sympathetically. "Did you leave him here because you couldn't treat him?" "Yes, we are those villains," her husband replied. "Oh, don't listen to the director. She's mean." "Do you know anything about Miles?" Eleanor Vance asked hopefully. "Of course," the old woman sighed. "The boy took after his mother, your eyes, your hair. He was a handsome one." "What happened to him? Where is he?" "I have no good news for you." The nanny lowered her eyes. "He's not alive. His little heart couldn't take it 4 years ago. They didn't make it to the hospital in time. The expensive medications didn't help." The ground gave way beneath her feet. Eleanor Vance staggered. Her husband barely managed to catch her. "I thought it was better for you to know the truth," the nanny continued. "After all, you're his parents. Otherwise, you'd be searching, hoping, and then you'd find out anyway." "Thank you," Eleanor Vance managed to say. "It's better this way." "How do we live now?" her husband whispered. "It's hard, I understand," the old woman sighed. "But you have to live. You're not to blame. The boy was very sick. Without treatment with you, he would have gone even earlier. And here he was loved. He was well. He was so kind, affectionate, intelligent." They were silent all the way back. Eleanor Vance understood that the nanny was right. Miles was doomed, but she couldn't forgive herself for her faint-heartedness, even if he had lived less, but at home, with loving parents, not among strangers. The feeling of guilt settled on her soul forever. Nothing could wash it away. They, of course, told Sarah nothing. Miles became their secret. They didn't even talk about him with each other. It was too painful. But it was impossible not to think about their son. Not a day passed without Eleanor Vance remembering him. She prayed for him, lit candles in church, endlessly blaming herself for her weakness. The realization that nothing could be changed weighed heavily on her. To her surprise, over time she got used to it. The feeling of guilt became a part of her, without which she no longer imagined herself. Sarah grew up, went away to study, then stayed to work in the capital. She wasn't nearby, and that saddened them, but her parents were proud of her success and were ready to accept it, as long as she was happy. Eleanor Vance retired. Her husband was still working. His small workshop had turned into a successful firm, where he became a big boss with a good salary. He liked his work, and Eleanor Vance suspected it helped him not to think about the past. Eleanor Vance finally was able to devote herself to her home. She had worked all her life. There wasn't enough time for household chores. Now the apartment was perfectly tidy, and there were always culinary masterpieces on the table. It turned out that taking care of loved ones wasn't a heavy duty, but a joy. Only there weren't enough loved ones to care for. Just her husband and the cat Whiskers. But she was happy. She dreamed of grandchildren who would come for the summer. She would make up for it with them. The only thing that clouded her measured life, besides the usual thoughts about Miles, was her health. And now she was returning from the clinic. She walked through the park. She loved this place. It was beautiful, lively, spacious, with many playgrounds. This is where she would take her grandchildren. The sooner the better. Eleanor Vance smiled at her dreams, imagining a boy and a girl. A thin, plaintive voice pulled her out of these sweet dreams. A tiny boy, looking about 3 or 4 years old, was tugging at her coat. Large blue eyes, a button nose with freckles, light curly hair peeking out from under his hat. An angel from a picture, only very thin. The child strikingly resembled Miles. Her heart ached with pain. Eleanor Vance took a deep breath to compose herself. The boy spoke again, and it became clear he needed help. "I'm cold, and I want to eat, and my mom's not here," the little one said. He looked lost and scared, gazing at her with hope. Eleanor Vance took his hand, and they slowly walked around the park, looking for his mom. The boy, who said his name was Timmy, looked around carefully but didn't find his mom. "Where do you live?" she asked. But Timmy was too small to give an address. From his confused words, she understood that he had traveled a long time by train with his mom and some Uncle Gary. Then they went for a walk, he played on the playground, and his mom disappeared. Let's go to the station, Eleanor Vance decided. Maybe they're looking for her. At the station, the duty officer reported that there had been no announcements about missing children today. What should I do with him? Eleanor Vance asked, bewildered. To the police, the duty officer replied indifferently. They'll deal with them there. The man's indifference outraged her. She called a taxi and went with Timmy to the police station. On the way, the little one fell asleep on her lap. Eleanor Vance stroked his hair and thought about the striking resemblance to Miles. Could it be that fate had given her a chance to atone for her guilt? It was clear Timmy had been abandoned, brought from afar and left. Eleanor Vance didn't condemn his parents. Who knew what had driven them to it? But the mother had acted carelessly, leaving the child in such danger. Anyone could have found him. Perhaps in despair she hadn't thought about it. Eleanor Vance was sure only extreme need could have made her do that. In any case, the little one was unwanted. An orphanage awaited him. Maybe take him in, become his mother or grandmother. Her husband would probably agree, but they wouldn't give Timmy to her. He was sent to the hospital for examination, then to a boarding school. His mother was declared missing. Eleanor Vance told her husband about the foundling. The following weekend, they went to visit him in the hospital. Timmy was happy, hugged her, shook her husband's hand. He turned out to be very lively, talked about the hospital, asked questions, shared his observations. Eleanor Vance was falling in love with this smart boy, saw how much her husband liked him. When it was time to leave, Timmy hugged them, not letting go. Tears were in his eyes. You're so kind. I'll miss you, like Granny Carol. Is she your grandmother? Eleanor Vance asked hopefully. A neighbor from our house, Timmy replied. Eleanor Vance sighed. Since then, they often visited him, first in the hospital, then in the orphanage. Eleanor Vance asked to take him into guardianship, imagining how he would live with them, surrounded by care. But while the investigation was ongoing, it was impossible. Timmy's mom was found. She turned out to be a young woman, a graduate of an orphanage named Chloe, who lived by the sea, enjoying her freedom. She didn't need the child and easily left him. That's what her cohabitant Gary, a much older man with experience, advised her. He explained that if she officially put the child in an orphanage, she would have to pay alimony, but if she lost him, she wouldn't. They even placed an ad about his disappearance, but in another city, to cover their tracks. Chloe received a real prison sentence for abandoning a child in danger and went to a penal colony. There she wrote a refusal of her son. Now Timmy was officially an orphan. Gary, who had instigated her, avoided punishment, which was unfair. Eleanor Vance and her husband didn't hesitate for long. They had grown to love Timmy and were ready to welcome him into their family. They spoke with Sarah. Their daughter was surprised but happy about the appearance of a brother. However, the guardianship authorities refused them. "Where would you take such a small one?" said the bespectacled employee, looking at them with regret. "Your age is not right? Your health? We don't have the right to give him to you, although your conditions are good." They returned home devastated. They had made plans on how they would set up the children's room, where they would enroll the boy, and here, a refusal. How would they tell Timmy now? How to explain that they wouldn't take him, although they had promised? Why had they given him hope without first checking with guardianship? It was foolish, but they continued to visit him at the orphanage, brought gifts, went for walks. The little one had become dear to them. Giving him up was unthinkable. "I need to talk to Timmy's mom, to Chloe," Eleanor Vance told her husband. "Why?" He was surprised. "Maybe she'll write that she wants to give him to us." "She's nobody to him," her husband reminded her. "She refused him. But what if I find out something important? I can't accept the thought that he'll spend his whole life in an orphanage." "I understand. My heart aches for him too. But how will this meeting help?" "I don't know, but I feel I have to talk to her." "As you wish." Eleanor Vance found out where the penal colony was and went. 2 days by train to northern Stepnovsk. She had never been to such a place. Gloomy corridors, gray walls, heavy air. A sullen employee led her to a visiting room, which looked like a simple living room. Soon Chloe was brought in, very young, thin, dark-skinned, with piercing black eyes. "Who are you?" she asked warily. Eleanor Vance introduced herself and told her how she had found Timmy. "So it's because of you I'm sitting here?" Chloe sneered. "Others would have found him," Eleanor Vance replied. "There were Roma people walking around. I hoped they would take him. They need children to beg. And Timmy has a suitable appearance. He'd get more." Eleanor Vance felt anger boiling up inside her. How could this shameless, selfish girl have given birth to such a wonderful boy? He must take after his father. "Where is Timmy's father?" Eleanor Vance asked, barely suppressing her irritation. The boy's fate depended on this girl. "Father?" Chloe snorted. "Lives somewhere. They say he got married, had a daughter. Quick, wasn't he? And he swore he loved me, asked me to come back." "Tell me more," Eleanor Vance seized on the hope. What if the father was a decent man who would take his son? "Why should I tell you?" Chloe grumbled, but then brightened up. "All right, I'll tell you, but not for free." "How much?" Eleanor Vance asked. Chloe thought, calculating the price. 5,000 will do." Eleanor Vance hid her relief. "All right." She reluctantly agreed, took out half, and handed it to Chloe. "Okay," Chloe cheered up. "It's a simple story, but long. Listen." She grew up in an orphanage. Childhood was difficult, hunger, cruelty. Eleanor Vance could hardly understand how. After that, one could condemn her own child to it. Having received an apartment in a dilapidated shack, Chloe rejoiced in her freedom and her own place. But she didn't like to work. Young, attractive, she quickly figured out how to live without overexerting herself, at the expense of men. Admirers were plentiful. One day she met David, a former classmate from college. A modest, blue-eyed guy was in love with her but was shy. Chloe amused herself by embarrassing him. An accidental meeting in the park. David had changed, become more confident, matured. His feelings for Chloe hadn't faded. It was strange, but pleasant. Chloe quickly charmed him. They started dating. David was happy, even proposed. But he had a big drawback, strict parents who controlled his life. Even if they got married, David's parents wouldn't take their eyes off Chloe. Goodbye parties and freedom. And David himself? Too proper, boring. David's wife meant home, routine, family. Not for Chloe, at least not then. She refused him, pushed him away roughly. A couple of weeks later, she realized she was pregnant. By David. She wanted to have an abortion, but it was too late. The hospital refused. What to do? No money, no job. An acquaintance advised her to have the baby. Don't miss the chance. There will be benefits, and you can demand money from the father. Chloe thought, not a bad prospect. But she didn't understand what a child was. Very quickly she realized motherhood was hard labor, a punishment. The boy was born healthy, calm, they said, but he turned her life into a nightmare. He cried, demanded food, attention. It was unbearable. At first, David only helped with money. Chloe didn't let him see his son, just out of spite, enjoying her power. But when the baby completely exhausted her, she needed his help. David gladly took care of his son, fed him, changed him, took him for walks. Chloe rested during this time. Then David started taking Timmy to his place overnight. He lived separately from his parents. In Timmy's birth certificate, the father line was blank. That's how Chloe received benefits. But in fact, David raised the boy from 6 months to 2.5 years old. He worked remotely and could combine work and caring for his son. Chloe lived as she had dreamed, parties, admirers, drinking. There was money, state benefits, and David's help. Admirers paid for the drinks. Life seemed wonderful, a reward for her orphanage past. One day, during another party, guardianship arrived. It turned out David had decided to officially establish paternity, do a DNA test, and revoke Chloe's parental rights. He believed it was dangerous for Timmy to live with her. Chloe couldn't allow that. Goodbye benefits. She threw a terrible scandal at David, took her son, and forbade him to approach. "I'll report you to the police. You're a stranger to him. Let them figure out how the child ended up with you. They'll put you in jail," she screamed. How to behave with the child's father, her experienced friends taught her. Let him transfer money, he's obligated, but don't let him see him. David tried to make up. He clearly loved the boy. But Chloe was adamant she didn't need problems. Timmy grew up. There was less trouble with him. He could be let out to play in the yard, although the neighbors complained. Chloe didn't care. A year passed. Timmy almost forgot David. He also didn't appear, but he sent money regularly. Chloe learned that David had married, was expecting a child. To her surprise, she was upset. It seemed his life was indifferent to her, but she was used to feeling her power over him. And here, another woman. But soon Chloe had a new passion, Gary, a shift worker. Old enough to be her father, but strong, confident, with money. With him, she could live comfortably. But Timmy was in the way. He needed to be fed, clothed. He demanded attention, constantly asked questions. Gary suggested getting rid of the boy. A convenient opportunity presented itself. They decided to move to the sea. The journey was long, the child could get lost. Chloe agreed. Motherhood was burdensome, caring for her son irritated her. She could have given him to David, but then he would have won. Gary talked her out of it. You'll remain the mother, you'll have to pay alimony. Chloe didn't want that. She didn't officially put him in an orphanage so she wouldn't have to pay. Gary's plan, leave him at the station in one city, report him missing in another, seemed perfect. Chloe was sure it would work. But everything went wrong. The negligent mother was found. And now Chloe is in a penal colony for abandoning a child. They hadn't accounted for that. And Gary is a scumbag, Chloe said angrily. He blamed everything on me, got away clean. Never mind, I'll get out. I'll get revenge. Thank you for the story, Eleanor Vance said. You've had a difficult life, but you had an apartment, work, his father helped. I don't understand how you could abandon such a miracle. Take this miracle yourself if you're so kind, Chloe said irritably. I'm not that kind. Eleanor Vance shook her head. I've made mistakes too, and they won't give Timmy to me. They say I'm too old. Well, fine. Let him live in an orphanage. I grew up there, and I'm fine. Eleanor Vance left the penal colony with a plan. If Chloe hadn't lied, Timmy's father was a decent man. She knew his name, the city where he lived, where he studied with Chloe. Finding him wouldn't be easy, but she had to do it. What happened next was up to fate, but finding David was vitally important. Upon returning, she actively began searching. She started with social networks, looking through Chloe's friends and their friends. There were many Davids, but the right one wasn't there. Then she placed an ad in a local group describing the situation. The result was unexpected. Pranksters started calling her, who found it amusing to tease her. At first, she answered with hope, thinking she had found Timmy's father, but she quickly realized her mistake. Calls poured in at any time, bothering her, making her nervous. In despair, she told Sarah, "Mom, why didn't you ask me?" Her daughter reproached. "I didn't want to bother you." "Delete the ad immediately. You need to hire a detective. I'll take care of it." "Is it expensive?" "Not as much as you think, but reliable." But a detective wasn't needed. That same evening, having just deleted the ad, she received a call. "I'm calling about your message," a quiet male voice said. Thinking it was another prankster, Eleanor Vance answered coldly, "I'm listening." "I think you're looking for my son. My name is David. His is Timmy. He and his mother disappeared recently. Everything matches." "What's the mother's name?" Eleanor Vance asked. This was her test question. "Chloe, tell me, is Timmy all right?" "It seems it's you," she decided. "Answer a couple more questions." "Of course. I want to be sure it's my son. Describe him." "Timmy is almost 4. He has big blue eyes, light curly hair, a button nose. He's very smart, picks everything up quickly, loves strawberry ice cream, animals, asks a million questions, very curious." "I understand," Eleanor Vance smiled. "You know your son and you love him?" "Timmy is all right. He's in a shelter. He needs help. I wanted to take him, but they refused me because of my age. That's why I was looking for you." "You can't imagine how grateful I am." David's voice trembled with emotion. "I'm leaving right away." "Write down my address," Eleanor Vance suggested. "We need to meet and talk. And it's better to go to Timmy together. He doesn't remember you. He was very small when you took care of him. But he's used to me. He trusts me." "How do you know I took care of him?" David was surprised. "I went to see Chloe. I talked to her. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found you." Eleanor Vance wanted to see David before meeting his son, to make sure he was a good person and that Timmy would be happy with him. So Eleanor Vance went to meet him at the station. She recognized David immediately. The young man was strikingly similar to Timmy, or rather, Timmy was similar to him. David didn't come alone. A little girl, about a year old, was sitting in his arms. Timmy's little sister, just as fair-haired, blue-eyed. Next to her walked a young, pretty woman, his wife. Eleanor Vance hurried towards them. Seeing this family, she understood. Timmy would be in good hands. If only they would give him to his father. With him, he would be happy. What luck that they had found each other. Thank you so much for not abandoning our son, for finding us. David smiled, looking at Eleanor Vance. He introduced his wife Kate and daughter Lily. They didn't go to the orphanage right away. They had to wait for visiting hours. Eleanor Vance helped them settle into a hotel. She offered them to stay with her, but Kate refused, not wanting to inconvenience her. You've already done so much for us, she said. I've always dreamed of a big family, of an older son. It seems my dream will come true. You'll really like Timmy. Eleanor Vance smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. He's wonderful. How I've missed him, David confessed. Finally, visiting hours arrived. The whole group, led by Eleanor Vance, sat in the orphanage lobby waiting for Timmy. The staff already knew the story. Some cried when they learned that the boy's father had been found. All that remained was to finalize the documents, which required time and many certificates. But they could see each other now. Just don't rush to hug him right away, Eleanor Vance warned. He might get scared. He doesn't remember you. I understand, David nodded. Of course he doesn't remember. He was very small. Why didn't you fight for him through court? Eleanor Vance asked. I tried, David replied, but I was a stranger to him. A DNA test required the mother's consent, and Chloe didn't give it. She needed Timmy as a way to earn money. Terrible, Kate said, her voice trembling. Many such mothers live on benefits, and then a man appears and the child becomes a hindrance. It's scary to think what could have happened to him. Tears welled up in her eyes. She was clearly upset. Soon she would be a wonderful mother to Timmy, loving and caring. You are his guardian angel, David smiled at Eleanor Vance. I have a daughter myself. Kate stroked Lily, who was sleeping in her arms. And I can't understand how anyone could do that. Eleanor Vance nodded silently. She agreed with Kate. She tried to find excuses for Chloe, her orphanage past, lack of love, but she couldn't. Apparently there are just such people. Unprincipled, selfish. Timmy was incredibly lucky that David and Kate appeared. You couldn't imagine better parents for him. The door to the lobby opened wide. The adults turned around. A caregiver, an elderly, plump woman, stood in the doorway, smiling. She was leading Timmy by the hand with his enormous blue eyes. The boy had been prepared for the meeting. He smiled affectionately at Eleanor Vance and looked at the strangers with curiosity. Timmy, these are our guests, the caregiver said. Say hello. The boy ran up, looking cheerfully at David and Kate. They smiled at him. Are you my new friends? Timmy asked seriously. How great. I was waiting for you. Then David and Kate, forgetting all instructions, couldn't restrain themselves. They hugged the boy from both sides, enclosing him in a circle of caring arms. Timmy stood there, blinking in surprise, and smiled. Then an amazing conversation began. Timmy, as always, showered them with questions. He asked about the future, about the city he would move to, about his room. He announced that he really liked Lily and offered to help with her. He importantly stated that he had experience. He was the best at playing with little ones in the orphanage. Lily also clearly loved her cheerful brother, smiled at him, and reached out her plump hands. 2 hours flew by unnoticed. Eleanor Vance's heart sang with joy. Everything had turned out even better than she could have dreamed. Yes, she had become attached to the boy, but now he had young parents, a little sister, and most importantly, his biological father. Nothing could replace a blood relative. Orlovsk was getting ready for the new year. The city sparkled with garland lights, shop windows beckoned with discounts. Eleanor Vance decided to walk from the station. Her bags were light, not many things. Only the gifts for Timmy's new family pleasantly weighed down her hands. She had chosen them with such pleasure. After that first meeting, Timmy quickly moved in with David. Knowing his story, everyone was cooperative, both guardianship and the staff. The DNA test confirmed paternity. The documents were processed quickly. A psychologist prepared Timmy, explained that David and Kate were now his parents. He accepted David immediately, but called Kate Auntie for a long time, although he loved her. Kate surrounded him with such love and affection that the boy blossomed, became calmer, more confident. But he remembered Chloe and loved her. Kate treated this with understanding. And recently a miracle happened. Timmy called Kate Mom for the first time. It felt so easy, so warm, Kate shared with Eleanor Vance. They often called each other. Timmy had become an invisible thread connecting them. Eleanor Vance was grateful to fate for these people. She had found true friends despite the age difference. They were comfortable and happy together. Eleanor Vance regretted that they lived so far away, in another city. David and Kate also seemed to miss her and constantly invited her to visit. And so she came, with gifts chosen with love. She wouldn't stay for New Year's Eve itself. She would go back home. Sarah had promised to come and hinted that she wouldn't be alone. She was probably bringing a fiancé, and from there it wasn't far to grandchildren. Soon there would be new little ones, in addition to the already dear Timmy and Lily. The snow crunched under her feet, sparkling in the lamplight. Here was the right house. They were waiting for her. Timmy would probably rush to hug her at the doorstep, showering her with questions about the train. They welcomed her warmly. A set table awaited in the living room. Wonderful smells wafted from the kitchen. The evening was warm, heartfelt, and cheerful. Eleanor Vance listened with joy to stories about the children. Life with little ones is never boring. David and Kate looked tired but radiant with happiness. Timmy made our family complete, Kate said. I realized that this was exactly the kind of boy we were missing. David looked at his wife with tenderness, grateful to her. People like Kate were rare. Then Eleanor Vance played with Timmy and Lily. They built towers, drank tea with dolls, swung on the indoor swing, listening to their ringing laughter. Before bedtime, she read them a fairy tale. Both listened, holding their breath, even little Lily. She was at the age when she copied her older brother like a little monkey. Lying on the sofa in the guest room, Eleanor Vance smiled. The household was asleep. In the silence, the clock ticked. Sleepily, peacefully. She was used to being tormented by thoughts of Miles before sleep. She imagined him in the orphanage without affection, whether he was mistreated. It weighed on her. But now it was easier. Memories of that mistake didn't bring the same suffering. Timmy seemed to have healed old wounds. The guilt hadn't disappeared. She still felt pain for her abandoned, sick son. But she had decided to tell Sarah everything. Her daughter was shocked, listened, holding her breath, but she didn't turn away as Eleanor Vance had feared. On the contrary, she pitied them, accepted their terrible choice, supported them. How did you live with that? Sarah whispered, hugging them. You were so young, scared, and no one helped. My poor dears. Yes, Miles's tragedy would always remain with her, but now life was easier. She had been given a chance to save a child so similar to her son, and she had taken it. Timmy was in a loving family, and in Eleanor Vance's soul, peace and joy.